Good morning, Nona Church family. Hey, we are right now linking in live with our Moss Park campus. Let's make a ton of noise and welcome in Moss Park today. So thankful for you and so grateful that we get to stay connected, engaged in this way as we jump into part 2 of our series, Among Lions. But before we get there, I want to celebrate something with you. Last weekend, we had baptisms across all of our campuses, and we celebrated baptisms number 128 and 129 this year. Can we celebrate that? Just an amazing thing that God's doing in the life of our church. And I do want to encourage you to lean in with us. And if you're ready to take a step of courage, get ready to be baptized, feel like that's a good next step for your faith, I want to encourage you to sign up on the Nona Church app, get connected with your campus lead. We have another baptism in November, and what a great opportunity for us to celebrate what God is doing. Well, we are in a series titled Among Lions, Living with Courage in a Culture That Has None, and we're allowing the life of Daniel to guide us as we study Daniel chapter 1 through 6, verse by verse together as a church family this fall. Can I just get a quick amen from anybody in the room if you would agree that we are living in a culture that needs courage? Can I get a good amen? Do you believe that we need courage today? And so what we want to do is lean in and learn together. This is the definition for courage that we have laying out before our church for the coming weeks. It's this: courage is doing the right thing when it's the hard thing, even when others are doing the easy thing. And my hope is that we would memorize this together, have this definition seared in our hearts, teach it to our kids as well. And so would y'all say this with me together out loud on the count of 3? 1, 2, 3. Courage is doing the right thing when it's the hard thing, even when others are doing the easy thing. Now, that is easier said than done, right? Can we just agree with that? Easier said than done, especially when you're under pressure. A quick question, raise your hand. Do you feel under pressure every now and then? Anybody feel that way? Maybe it's the pressure of your work environment, trying to figure out how to meet a deadline or meet a quota. Maybe it's the peer pressure we can feel as high school students or young adults trying to stay connected, trying to fit in the midst of the world that we're a part of. Maybe it's the pressure of our family and trying to make sure that our in-laws are happy and that they have what they need. But all of us know what it's like to carry pressure. And the question that we're going to answer today, I think is really helpful for all of us. It's this big question: what do you do when you're under pressure? And in the life of Daniel, we have an amazing example of how you and I can engage and handle pressure in everyday life. Because if there's someone who gets pressure, it is Daniel. Just to recap, this is Daniel's story. Daniel has been kidnapped alongside his friends. They've been taken from the city of Jerusalem. The kingdom of Israel has been destroyed at this point. The Israelites are in exile, and they've been taken to Babylon. And while they're in captivity in Babylon, there's a strategy to try to get these Hebrew boys to forget their faith, forget their God, and become Babylonian. And what I love about this story is that when we look at the life of Daniel, we're not looking at a pastor or a missionary who's trying to figure out how to handle pressure. Daniel and his friends, these guys are government workers, all right? They're everyday guys that are working at the IRS or working at the DMV. They are working normal, everyday Joe jobs, and they are experiencing the challenges and the pressure of trying to figure out how to be faithful men in a culture and a world that is not interested in their faith at all. Like, these guys are not going to work every day with a boss that's like, well, tell me what you learned in your devotions this week. Like, that's not the world that they're in. Nobody's asking them, how's your heart? How's your spirit? Can I pray for you? This is not the world of these guys. And it's really encouraging for me because what we'll look at today and what we'll learn is that you can be in the marketplace and have incredible impact. That in fact, wherever you're working, whatever job you have, whatever place you're at, whatever crazy boss you're dealing with right now, God has a goal and a purpose and a reason for you to be there, and you can make a big impact. So here's the story that we see in Daniel chapter 2 that sets it all up for us. Verse 1 starts this way. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his mind was troubled, and he could not sleep. Let's stop here for a minute. It's important for us to understand that pagan kings, especially in ancient history, believed that what they dreamed or what they saw when they were asleep was an indicator of what was to come. So they hired a bunch of different interpreters and people to be a part of their court to help them discern what their dream was so they could plan and prepare for the future. So King Nebuchadnezzar, the most powerful man in the world, has a dream, and he wants to know what's going on with that dream. Verse 2 tells us, so the king summoned the magicians, the enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. And when they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. And then the astrologers answered the king, may the king live forever. Nothing like some good flattery, right? With your boss. May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it. Now, King Nebuchadnezzar is a very smart guy. He remembers that this assortment of people, they're tricky in the sense that if they know the dream, then they can tell King Nebuchadnezzar some kind of weird, mystical, almost right, not very clear interpretation of the dream. These guys in a lot of ways are like this person here, Miss Cleo. Do y'all remember Miss Cleo? When I was growing up as a kid, I remember Miss Cleo on like daytime TV, right? And she would give you a free reading, right? And I'm from Jamaica, like everyone in my family is from Jamaica. And Miss Cleo would be like free reading, and she'd have this terrible Jamaican accent where she'd be like, call me now. Do you guys remember this? Right? Now here's what made me so upset. She's not even Jamaican. She was born in LA. King Nebuchadnezzar has a bunch of Miss Cleos around him, and he knows that if he gives them what happened in the dream, they're gonna come up with some random way to explain it away. So look at what the king does. Verse 5, the king replied to the astrologers, this is what I firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was, in other words, you gotta tell me what I was dreaming and then interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces, and your house is turned into piles of rubble. But if you do tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me. So at this point, here's what the dream interpreters do. They reply and they say, well, let the king tell his servants the dream and we will interpret it. And then the king answered him, I'm certain that you are trying to gain time. Anybody done this with their boss before? Once more they replied, after he said gain time, you realize that this is what I firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me. The astrologers answered the king again, there is, and I want everybody, all of our campuses to say this, there is no one on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans. In other words, King Nebuchadnezzar, what you're asking us to do is impossible. No one has ever been able to interpret a dream without knowing what the dream is first. How are we supposed to read your mind? To which King Nebuchadnezzar is like, well, I thought that was your job, Miss Cleo. Like, what in the world? Verse 12, this made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all of the wise men, the entire category, all of the wise men of Babylon. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death. And men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. I mean, Daniel isn't even in the room and he's guilty by association. You ever felt that way before? Like your boss makes a decision and now you've got to deal with the result of that decision? Or somebody says something sideways in a meeting and now all of a sudden you've got 10 new things that you have to do that you didn't know you had to do? You ever felt that kind of pressure? If there's anything that Daniel knows intense pressure. I mean, all of us are a little bit nervous about layoffs, aren't we? Everybody's always worried about, the potential of a layoff. Well, Daniel's worried about a cutoff of his head. This is the world and the situation that he's in. Daniel is under intense pressure. Now, I want to pause here for just a moment. I want to ask you this question. Where are you experiencing intense pressure right now? It may not be as dire as the circumstance that Daniel and his friends are in, but all of us know what it's like to wake up with stress or nerves or uncertainty. We all know what it's like to try to have to meet a deadline or feel the stress or pressure that our work environment or family dynamic or even at school we might be able to feel. And here's what I love about the storyline, what we're gonna study for the next couple of minutes in these verses, is that Daniel gives us a masterclass on how to handle pressure. So if you're taking notes today in your formation journal or in your Nona Church app, today's a great teaching day. Today's a day for you to jot down some notes, because what we're gonna get with Daniel is the pathway to dealing with and handling pressure. Here's the first thing that we're going to learn from Daniel's life and story. The first one is this, that the first step to handling pressure is to get perspective. Here's what we find in verse 14. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise man of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with, look at this, wisdom and tact. In other words, there was a non-anxious presence about Daniel, even in the midst of the nervousness of losing his own life. When the king comes and sends Arioch to knock on his door, Daniel doesn't respond with fear or stress, but he speaks with wisdom and tact. And because of this, Daniel leads to this moment. It says that Daniel asked the king's officer, why? Why did the king issue such a harsh decree? And Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. In other words, Daniel asks a question, and I imagine it kind of happens this way. As Arioch knocks on the door, Daniel asks him why. He kind of closes the door behind him. He says, listen, King Nebuchadnezzar, he's stressed out right now. I mean, he's kind of paranoid as a king. He's kind of worried about what's going to happen, what the future is going to hold. He's nervous about what might be around the corner. He's had this dream that's kind of stressing him out, and he wants somebody to give him clarity on what's happening, because this is important and it is intense. And in the midst of asking that question, Daniel gets insight into what's going on in King Nebuchadnezzar. This isn't some arbitrary decision that he's making. The stakes are high for him. A couple of spring breaks ago, I took my kids to La República Dominicana. Do we have any Dominicans in the room? Any of my Latinos in the room, right? Yeah. And we had a great time together. We're Caribbean, so we love the beach. We love the ocean. We love snorkeling. It's one of the things that my kids love to do. And so we decided that we would just go on like a trip or an excursion, take a boat out to a reef to go look at some fish. And one of the cool things about the boat that we were on is they had all of this chum that they threw in the water so that big fish would come. And our kids were pretty excited about this idea or concept. And so we're on the boat, and my kids have on a life vest. They have on snorkels with a mask, and we're told to jump into the water. And now my kids all know how to swim. They've all been snorkeling before. The water is crystal clear. And so the kids jump into the water ready for a good time. But they don't last but 45 seconds in the water. I mean, you know how like Jesus walked on water? My kids might have been the other 4 people in the world who have walked on water. I mean, those kids were in the water and out of the water so fast. And the reason why was because the water was pretty choppy. And when they jumped into the water, the waves and the choppiness of the water stressed them out. And I just heard screaming across the water as my kids clamored to try to get back into the boat. And I find this quite interesting because if you know anything about swimming, the worst decision you can make when you're in water is to panic. And my kids were panicking. And it was ironic to me because they had on a life vest, which means there's nothing that can happen to them except just bobbing in the water. And if you know anything about snorkeling, you know that if you have a mask and a snorkel, if you just put your head in the water, the snorkel itself keeps you afloat. But all of that did not matter to my kids in that moment because of the stress that they were feeling because of the choppiness of the water. And I wonder if for some of us, when we feel pressure in our lives, if we can forget that we have a life vest on that's gonna keep us afloat even in the midst of hard times. That we forget that we've got a snorkel connected to us, that if we were to just take a deep breath and place our face in the water, we would be okay. So often, panic is the reason why we lose perspective in the midst of pressure. This is why the Proverbs writer says it so well in Proverbs 16, verse 16. He says this, how much better to get wisdom than gold, to get insight rather than silver. For many of us, my invitation would be in the midst of an intense pressure moment in your life, take a deep breath and get curious instead of furious. The other way I might put it is, where do you need to pause? Where do you need to pause for perspective instead of panic? Because when you and I take a deep breath and realize that there's something holding us up, and it doesn't have to be us, but it's the very presence of God, when we recognize that God is with us, even in the midst of the choppy waters of the stress or the anxiety or the nerves that we might be feeling, we recognize that we are safer than we realize we are. And so this is what gives Daniel the capacity to speak with Arioch with wisdom and tact, to gain perspective. The second reality that we see is not only does Daniel gain perspective, but then he addresses the stress. That's the second thing you can write down. It says this, at this, Daniel went into the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. Now, you need to understand this. Daniel going to the king is pretty risky. If you remember, the king had asked for the enchanters to come to him. And the way that it worked in the ancient days is that if a king requested your presence, then you would know that you were safe. But if you request an audience with the king could say no and kill you on the spot. And I want us to remember something. The king has already decreed that Daniel and his friends are going to be killed. So when Daniel requests an audience with the king, it seems like he's walking directly towards his death sentence. But here's the wisdom of Daniel, is that Daniel recognizes that in order to handle pressure, he's got to address the stress. He can't avoid it. He can't go around it. He can't have a detour around the reality that he's facing. He's got to go through it. And friends, I need you to hear this. Oftentimes, we can try to avoid the thing instead of engage the thing. And Daniel recognizes that the only way for me to handle this pressure is to walk through it. So he goes directly to King Nebuchadnezzar and he asks for time to interpret the dream. He doesn't hide from the reality of what he's facing. My kids, when they were younger, we would play a lot of hide and seek. And hide and seek in our house looked like this. I would start counting down and they would just run from room to room. I'd hear doors slam. They'd argue with each other and they were so loud, you knew exactly where they were in the house, right? And eventually I'd go 4, 3, 2, 1. And multiple times what ended up happening is my kids would be running. They'd be caught in the middle of the living room with nowhere to hide and they'd just go like this. Because in their mind, if I can't see him, then he can't see me. And if we're honest, many of us deal with our stress this way. We pretend that if we just act like it's not there, then it's going to go away, which is why we numb. It's why we cope. It's why we avoid. It's why we sweep things under the rug. And in the end, what ends up happening is the problem never really goes away. It just gets worse. Daniel, from the moment he hears about what the king wants to do, makes the courageous decision to address the stress. The question I might ask you today is, what stress do you need to address instead of avoid? The third reality and the third step to handling stress is found in Daniel chapter 2, verse 17 and 18. It's this: choose to lean on community. Lean on community. Verse 17 says, then Daniel returned to his house and he explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, I love this, that in the book of Daniel, you'll find that Daniel's friends are sometimes written about in their Hebrew names, and then sometimes written about in their new Babylonian names. And I think it's by design and intentional here that in this particular moment, when we're introduced to his friends again, that the writer chooses to refer to Daniel's friends in their Hebrew names. Because it's a reminder that even though the culture has called them something else, these young men are still connected to the heart of their father and connected to the heart of their God. And it's especially important because Daniel returns home and he gathers with his friends, his close friends, and we find this in verse 18, that he urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven. That means, hey guys, would you pray with me about what's going on concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of Babylon. In other words, it's late at night. Daniel comes home, knocks on the door, opens the door. His roommates are there. They're probably playing video games, eating some ancient pizza. I don't know, whatever they're eating at that point. Probably just vegetables based upon what we learned in Daniel chapter 1, right? And as they're sitting together, Daniel's like, hey guys, I had a really, really bad meeting with King Nebuchadnezzar. Here's what's going on. Guys, we need to pray because if we don't figure out what's going on, our lives are done and the lives of all of the other folks that are a part of our team are done as well. And I think about how special it is that Daniel had community, that Daniel had close friends that he could meet with late at night to bring this kind of stress to. Because here's what I know. We tend to handle pressure better when we're in the midst of community than we do when we're on our own. The reality is that when you and I try to live our lives on our own, eventually the pressure of life, it begins to bear on us like it does here, and eventually we break. And when we break, what ends up happening is what we wish life was like no longer becomes a potential reality for us. Instead, what we are left with is holding the pieces. This is why the wisdom writer tells us in Proverbs 17:17 that a friend loves at all times and a brother is born for a time of adversity. It's why in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 9 through 12, we're told this, that two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. And pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if two lie down together, they'll keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of, say it with me, 3 strands is not quickly broken. You see, when you take your life and you place your life in the center of great community, when you experience pressure, it's harder and almost impossible to be broken. This is the wisdom of the scriptures. See, what allows Daniel to stay unbroken, what allows Daniel to endure in the midst of intense pressure is that he's got good people around him that believe in his God, that believe in him as a friend, are willing to stay up late at night and pray with him and walk the road together. And we all need community like this. If your life feels like it's falling apart in shambles, if you find yourself broken under the pressure of your day-to-day life, might I suggest to you the reason why is because of the lack of community that surrounds you. And here's what the research is showing, especially among men, that men today who say they have friends, that number is 50% less today than it was 20 years ago. That 1 out of 3 men in our culture polled say they have no friends at all. And we wonder why we find ourselves making regretful decision after regretful decision, falling into mistake after mistake, going to coping mechanism after coping mechanism. It's because loneliness ends up killing us. You need community. And I just want to speak specifically to the men in the room. Men, a lot hangs in the balance when you live life alone. And I want to challenge you, come out this week to our Nona Men gathering. We're going to have free pizza at our campus this week. Celebrate and connect with other men. Build relationships. And here's what you need to hear for all of us in the room, is that community is built consistently over time. It doesn't happen because you meet one time. It's because you stay in the game. Community is built over time through consistency. So listen, go to that Nona Men event, go to that Nona Women event, and then keep on going. Go to Nona Latino, go to Nona 55 Plus. Parents, keep on letting your kids show up to student ministry. Give it not just 1 month, not just 2 months. It takes time. It takes years to build community. Sign up for a community group. And if you had a bad experience in, the first community group you went to because those people were weird, don't worry. We got like 50 other options. Just go to another one, all right? But find community. It's what the local church can provide for you in a powerful way. And we need community in our life so that we don't get broken by the pressure that we're all facing. The question I might ask you is, who are your 2 a.m. people? Like, I've got a couple people in my life that they're not on my do not disturb list. On your phone where you can put do not disturb, right? You have your boss on do not disturb. I know you do, right? There's a couple people in my life that if they call at 2 o'clock in the morning, my phone's gonna ring and it's gonna be loud because I'm there for them. And they're people that I know are there for me as well. And we need our Mishaels and our Azariahs. We need our Daniels to be with us at the 2 o'clock moment to help us walk through the pressure of life. And this is the gift that the local church can give you. So lean in and find community. The fourth reality that we see after we have good community is that we can trust in a big God. When it comes to how to handle pressure, after we've found good community, a next step is to trust in a big God. This is what we find in verse 19. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. And I want you to see Daniel's response. He finds out or has a clue as to what's going on in the life of King Nebuchadnezzar. And look at Daniel's prayer. Then Daniel, and I want you guys to say, there's gonna be like 9 of them, so get ready. I want you to highlight and say out loud all the times you see the word God or you or he highlighted in this text, okay? Read it out loud with me because I wanna make a point. I think it's an important one. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. Okay, let's keep on going. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. Let's keep it going. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank God and praise you, God of my ancestors. Here we go. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. 9 times in 4 verses, Daniel gives credit to God. That God has shown up in power, he's answered their prayer, and that he can now walk with a swagger in knowing that the God who preserved them in Israel is the God who's preserving them in Babylon. And I want you to see this. Daniel has this kind of prayer and declaration, not after he's interpreted the dream, not after he's met with King Nebuchadnezzar, not after he's passed the test. Like, what if Daniel woke up and what he thought was the mystery revealed to him was just Daniel's bad tofu from the night before? Like, how does he know that the dream has been revealed to him and that he has the right interpretation? Here's the answer. He doesn't know because he hasn't stood in front of King Nebuchadnezzar yet. And yet, before he goes into the test, he is declaring that God has already given him what he needs for success. Daniel trusts in a big God. And if you want to learn how to handle pressure in your life, it is by looking at the size of God instead of looking at the size of your circumstances. The way I might ask you is this way. Are you allowing right now, not in the future, not theoretical, right now, in the midst of the diagnosis, in the midst of the work dynamic, in the midst of the stress that you're feeling at home, are you allowing the size of your circumstances to determine the size of your God, or are you allowing God to determine the size of your circumstances? You see, Daniel embodies for us what it looks like to trust in a big God by declaring that God has the answer even though Daniel has yet to walk through the test. This is faith. It's trusting and believing in a big God, even in the midst of difficult circumstances. And this decision allows Daniel to make the fifth and final step towards handling pressure well. Daniel then walks in confidence. Look at verse 24. Then Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to execute the wise men of Babylon. And he said to them, do not execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king, he says, and I will interpret his dream for him. So Arioch took Daniel to the king at once and said, I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can tell the king what his dream means. The king asked Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it? And Daniel replied, look at Daniel's reply, the swagger of this man, right? The king says, can you interpret the dream? And look at Daniel's response. No wise man. What is Daniel? He's a wise man. He says, no wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But, say it with me, there is a God in heaven. Woo-hoo! One more time. There is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. Do you see the swagger that Daniel has? It doesn't come from his ability. It comes from the God who he trusts in. He says, he has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come. Your dream and the visions that pass through your mind as you were lying in bed are these. Now, I don't have time to go through verses 29 to 45. I would encourage you to read about these verses on your own time. But Daniel then interprets the dream and he explains it in clarity. And this is what Daniel effectively says. He says, King Nebuchadnezzar, you saw a statue, didn't you? And King Nebuchadnezzar kind of leans in and he's like, I'm listening. And that statue, King Nebuchadnezzar, had a head of gold. And then it had a breastplate, didn't it, of silver. And then it had a body and thighs of brass. And then it had legs of iron and feet of straw and clay. And Daniel has gotten clarity on the dream. He's done the thing that nobody else can do. King Nebuchadnezzar says, okay, I'm listening. And then Daniel says, here's what you need to know. Each of these parts of the body are representations of the kingdoms that are to come in the future. And then Daniel says in verse 44, in the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. He talks about a stone that's going to crush this statue. And he says this, it will crush all those kingdoms and bring to them an end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain that you saw, a rock not made by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. And Daniel goes on to say, the great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true and its interpretation is trustworthy. In other words, King Nebuchadnezzar, you saw a statue, and that statue is representation of all of the kingdoms, including yours, that are to come. But then you saw this massive stone that obliterated the statue, and you're wondering what that stone is. And that stone comes from the God of heaven, and it's going to obliterate all of the kingdoms of the earth, and it's going to be the kingdom that endures forever. And that stone wasn't made by human hands. Does this sound like anything you've heard before? It's the way that Peter talks about Christ as the living stone, Christ the cornerstone, that Paul talks about in Corinthians 9 to 10 times. In the New Testament, Christ is referred to as the living stone. In other words, there is a King of kings who is coming that's going to obliterate every kingdom that the world has ever seen. His kingdom is going to stand. It's the kingdom of heaven. 500 years before Jesus enters into the storyline of history, Daniel is prophesying that God is going to come. There's a king above all kings, and his name is Jesus. Is that not amazing? This is the prophecy. And I think it's remarkable that Daniel shares this story with King Nebuchadnezzar. Because here's what's so powerful about it to me, is that Daniel had the courage to stand up when everyone else was running away. Daniel had the courage to say the truth to the king of Babylon. I mean, think about this. Once he's interpreted the dream part and King Nebuchadnezzar knows that this guy can be trusted, would you then follow with the bad news that, hey, King Nebuchadnezzar, just want you to know your kingdom's gonna fall apart one day? Anybody think that's a good look? No, it's offensive. But Daniel is willing to tell the truth even when his life is on the line. That's courage. It's the kind of courage we need in today's culture. It's the kind of courage of a man whose faith is set on the heart of a big God who he can trust instead of a king who's here today and gone tomorrow. In Daniel's decision to stand with courage, it is the moment and the trajectory shaping opportunity of his lifetime. And it teaches us something about pressure. It's this, that pressure reveals our character. It doesn't create it. Who we are is revealed in moments of pressure. And the result of Daniel standing with courage leads to two outcomes that would change his life. And hear me, it would actually change King Nebuchadnezzar's life as well. Because theologians and scholars believe that it's at this moment that God begins to plant seeds in the life of King Nebuchadnezzar that some scholars argue leads him to bow his knee to the God of Daniel in later chapters. Two things I want you to just take away today about what happens when you stand with courage in the midst of pressure. The first one is this, is that pressure leads to praise. In other words, when you stand with courage in your workplace, you allow God to shine through you in such a way where people will begin to see God in you. Look at what happens as a result. Verse 46, Daniel chapter 2, verse 46. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor and ordered that an offering and an incense be presented to him. In other words, King Nebuchadnezzar still doesn't get it. He doesn't recognize that it's about God, not about Daniel. So he begins to worship Daniel, kind of awkward. And then we find this in verse 46. Then the king said to Daniel, surely, look at this, who's God? Your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery. God begins to do a work in King Nebuchadnezzar that's gonna come to fruition in later chapters. And I need you to hear me say this. When you speak the truth at your business and when you stand in courage, young student, when you choose to not do what the rest of your friends are doing and participate in the social media bullying that they have with a friend or laugh at the joke that you know is inappropriate, when you choose to stand with courage and integrity instead of cheat on that test or exam, even though everybody else is doing it, you're giving people an opportunity to see that your God really is who you believe he is. And King Nebuchadnezzar not only admits that Daniel's God might be real, but he's willing to say that that God is the Lord of all kings, which includes him. Here's the second reality. When you stand with courage in the midst of pressure, pressure not only leads to praise, but it also leads to promotion. Look at verse 48. It says this, then the king placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all its wise men. Moreover, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego administrators over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself remained in the royal court. In chapter 1, Daniel's a victim. By chapter 2, Daniel is a victor. Why? Because he stood in courage. And friends, I don't know if you feel like you're on the victim side of life right now, but when you choose to stand with courage, don't be surprised when the story gets written in a different way and you find yourself a victor. He's the second most powerful man in all of Babylon in a matter of a few chapters because of his willingness to stand in courage in the midst of pressure. And so I just want to leave us with this question today. How are you handling pressure right now? Not in the future, not theoretically, but with the thing that you're dealing with right now. The uncertainty that you're feeling, the worry that you're carrying, the pressure that you're feeling. How are you handling it? Man, God would invite you to get some perspective. He would invite you to address the stress instead of avoid it. God would invite you to lean in on community. He'd invite you to trust him as a big God and then invite you to walk in confidence, to trust that he is a God who is with you. He's not far away. Maybe a deeper question is, what if? What if the diagnosis you're carrying is an opportunity for God to shine through you? What if the uncertainty you're feeling is an opportunity for God to demonstrate confidence that your friends need to see? What if the challenge you're feeling to fit in at school is an opportunity for you to let God be a light to your friends? What if God is using the hardship and pressure and stress you're feeling right now as an opportunity, the same way he used Daniel and King Nebuchadnezzar's life, to transform the people around you by simply seeing you show up with courage to do the right thing even when it isn't the easy thing? What if? So today at all of our campuses, I want to invite you right now, would you stand up with me? And what I want to do at all of our locations today is I want to give you about 30 seconds with your eyes closed to answer this question. What is the pressure that you're feeling right now? What is the stress that you're carrying right now? What is the worry that you're carrying right now? Maybe it's a diagnosis. Maybe it's stress at work. Maybe it's financial stress. Maybe it's relational pressure. Maybe it's worry or concern. Whatever it is, I want you just to identify what's the thing that you're carrying? What's the pressure that you're under? As you've named and identified that thing at all of our campuses, here's what I want you to do. In a minute, I'm going to lead us through a prayer. But before we get to that part, here's what I want you to do. Would you just open your hands where you are as a sign and symbol to God, saying, hey, God, the thing that I'm under pressure and I'm feeling, I want to hand it to you. Now, here's what I want to invite you to do. I want you to just open your eyes where you are. And on the screen and at our locations, we're going to pray this prayer. We're going to pray the prayer that Daniel prayed when he found himself under pressure. And I want to invite you to pray that prayer with courage. Pray that prayer with strength today. And if you can't read it out loud, or if you don't want to pray it out loud, just allow these words to be prayed over you. But let's do this together. Daniel chapter 2, verse 20. Say these words out loud on the screen. Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. And all of God's people said, amen and amen. Let's thank our good God today. Amen.